They told you that DNA doesn't lie. They promised you answers. They sold you little plastic tubes filled with hope and said, "Send us your story, we'll tell you who you are." But what if I told you they were lying? Not by mistake, not because the science wasn't ready, but because they never intended to tell you the whole truth. What if I told you that 90% of your African ancestry, your true history, was hidden, erased, buried, and the people who did it were the same white scientists who built the very systems that profit from your blood today? This isn't a glitch. This isn't an accident. This was by design, because African DNA holds secrets they don't want you to know. Secrets about your power. Secrets about your origin, secrets about your survival. By the end of this video, you'll see the full picture, how your roots were stolen, fragmented, and sold back to you in neat little reports, while the deepest truths about your ancestors were locked away. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover changes everything you thought you knew about yourself. When you spit into that tube and mailed it off, you thought you were unlocking the keys to your history. You thought you were reclaiming the story they stole, but you weren't getting the full story. You were getting the version they decided you were allowed to see. Today, commercial DNA kits like Ancestry DNA and 23andMe dominate the market. They promise to reveal your ethnic roots, your tribe, your nation, your people. But if you're African or descended from Africa, what you actually get back is a vague label. West African, Sub-Saharan African, broadly African, that's it. No specific country, no specific tribe, no detailed breakdown like Europeans get. There's a reason. According to a Vox report from 2018, most DNA ancestry kits severely underrepresent African populations and rely on reference data dominated by European genomes. In plain language, the database they're comparing your DNA to is overwhelmingly white. It's like trying to identify your family in a photo album where only a few faded pictures of black people even exist. Of course, they can't give you real answers. Of course, they have to generalize your existence. It was built to exclude you from the beginning. And here's the dirty secret they never admit. The science to identify African ethnic groups already exists. The technology already exists. But the investment, the care, the respect to do it properly, because in their eyes, your African roots don't matter enough to map. You're good enough for a marketing campaign, good enough to sell a few test kits, but not good enough to trace back to your true nations. Not good enough to give the dignity of full identity. They didn't fail to tell you the truth. They chose not to. Here's what they don't tell you. African DNA is the most complex, the most ancient, and the most powerful genetic code on Earth. Scientists know this. They've known about it for decades. According to the National Human Genome Research Institute, 2020, African populations contain more genetic diversity than all other populations combined. Let that sink in. The oldest, most intricate branches of the human family tree are African, not European, not Middle Eastern African. Every mutation, every adaptation, every survival trait traces back to African ancestors who endured the raw forces of nature long before the rest of humanity ever migrated outward. When you hear scientists talk about genetic markers for resistance to disease, stronger bone density, superior mitochondrial variation, they're talking about African DNA. And that's exactly why they fear it, because to fully study it, to fully map it, would mean admitting that Africa is not a footnote in human history. It is the source. But instead of celebrating this richness, they downplay it. They simplify it. They erase it. Because African genomes are so diverse, They don't fit neatly into the tidy little boxes they designed for Europe. And instead of expanding their framework, they narrowed your identity to fit their broken model. They told you West African, Sub-Saharan, broadly African, as if 1 billion people across a vast continent could be summed up in 3 lazy words. Because the truth is too powerful. If you knew that your DNA carries the blueprint of survival, the secrets of human endurance, the original songs of creation itself, you would walk differently. You would think differently. You would realize that what they sold you wasn't your full story. It was a fragment, a footnote, and 90% of your true roots were left out, on purpose. Now, let's get to the real machinery behind the deception. When you send off your DNA sample, what database do they compare it to? Not a complete global archive, not a balanced, equal library of human history. No, they compare your DNA to a database that is overwhelmingly white. According to a study published in Nature, 2016, more than 80% of participants in genome-wide studies are of European descent, while African ancestry makes up less than 2%. Less than 2%. Think about that. Africa, the cradle of civilization, the origin of all humanity, barely represented at all. If you're African, or if you descend from African bloodlines, you are being compared to a system that barely even includes you. It's like trying to find your hometown on a map where 98% of the cities are in Europe. No wonder your results come back vague. No wonder you're labeled broadly African. No wonder your identity is reduced to a category, not a culture. The system was never designed to find you. It was designed to find them, to fine-tune distinctions between Germans and Swedes, to differentiate the Irish from the Scottish, to separate Northern Italians from Southern Italians. But you were grouped into one massive amorphous label, Africa. No distinction between Yoruba and Igbo. No acknowledgement of Wolof, Akan, Mandinka or Zulu. No recognition of Maasai, Berber or Nubian. Because to them you weren't worth the investment. You weren't worth the specificity. You weren't worth the truth. They erased your ancestors in the code itself and then had the audacity to sell it back to you as science. This isn't science, it's systematic invisibility. Because if they can erase you from the database, they can erase you from history, from identity, and from memory itself. But we are here to remember. And we are just getting started. To understand how your African roots were erased, you have to go back to the very beginning of modern genetics. And the truth is ugly. The foundation of Western genetic science wasn't built to uplift humanity. It was built to divide it. It was built to rank, categorize, and justify the domination of non-European peoples. According to Harriet A. Washington, author of Medical Apartheid, early genetic research was deeply entangled with eugenics, a movement designed to prove the so-called superiority of the white race. Scientists measured skull sizes, categorized skin colors, and manipulated data to argue that black people were biologically inferior. They used pseudoscience to justify slavery, colonialism, forced sterilizations, segregation, and medical experimentation on black bodies without consent. And the institutions that fueled these atrocities? They weren't fringe operations, they were the most respected names in American science. Harvard University, Rockefeller Foundation, Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology, Human Heredity, and Eugenics. The same laboratories that today collect your DNA for research are the descendants of the same laboratories that once declared you less than human. But here's the cold, brutal truth. The mindset never fully changed. They no longer measure your skull. Now they measure your blood. They no longer chain your body. Now they chain your identity. By controlling the information you're allowed to access about your own roots. Because if you knew the full extent of your ancestry, if you knew the dynasties, the empires, and the civilizations your DNA holds memory of, you would walk too boldly. You would speak too loudly. You would see yourself not as a product of slavery, but as a descendant of kings, queens, scientists, and warriors. And they cannot afford for you to know that. So they buried the truth under percentages. They hid it behind vague categories. They locked it away in dusty archives and called it science. But we are here to unlock it. We are here to tear the lies apart bone by bone, cell by cell, ancestor by ancestor. Because the blood remembers. And so do we. They told you DNA testing was about discovering your story. But behind the glossy ads and smiling faces, there's a darker truth. Your DNA is big business. And African DNA? It's the most valuable prize of all. According to MIT Technology Review 2019, pharma giants are racing to collect African because it holds the keys to unlocking new treatments, new patents, and new billion-dollar drug markets. But here's what they don't tell you. The people donating that DNA to the descendants of Africa rarely see a penny. Pharmaceutical companies like GlaxoSmithKline, Illumina, and 23andMe collect African genetic material, use it to develop new drugs, file patents, and build fortunes without ever returning ownership or profits to African people. They hold your genetic gold, but leave you out of the treasure room. And it gets worse. In Africa today, biotech companies are setting up partnerships to gather DNA from rural communities, sometimes without full informed consent, sometimes by dangling small incentives like food, health checkups, or school supplies. They tell people it's for research. They don't mention the billions they'll make later. It's the oldest scam on earth. Take from Africa, profit elsewhere. During the transatlantic slave trade, they stole African bodies. Today, they steal African genomes. They are harvesting your blood, your cells, your ancestral code, the very blueprint of your survival, and turning it into profit. And just like before, they have no intention of sharing the wealth. They rename your origins in their language. They repackage your genes into their products. They erase your story from their success. And when you get your little DNA report, they hand you back crumbs. Tiny percentages, vague regions, empty categories. While they feast on the full meal, they stole our bodies in chains. Now they steal our DNA in silence. But we are breaking the silence. We are ripping the mask off. Because your blood, your history, and your survival story are not for sale. Now let's talk about the deception hiding in plain sight. When you get your DNA results, what do they say? If you're of European descent, you get detailed reports. 47% Scandinavian, 32% Scottish, 18% Irish, specifically from County Clare. You get tribes, you get towns, you get lineages mapped down to the village. But if you're black, if your ancestors survived the Middle Passage, if your roots stretch back to the mighty kingdoms of Africa, you get vague terms like West African, Sub-Saharan African, that's it. No specific kingdoms, no clear tribal names, no ancient nations mentioned. Just a massive, generalized label covering over 1.2 billion people and hundreds of cultures. And here's the harsh truth. That's not an accident. That's by design. According to the Vox Report 2018, commercial DNA tests drastically oversimplify African ancestry because of a lack of research investment. And because it's easier to sell vague results than confront the deep complexity of African civilizations. In other words, they simplify your identity on purpose. Because specificity gives you pride. Specificity gives you power. Specificity gives you connection to something real, something ancient, something undeniable. If they told you, you descend from the Yoruba, master traders and rulers of West Africa. You are Igbo, the architects of sophisticated democratic societies. Long before Europe even knew the word, you are Akan, from the gold-rich Ashanti Empire, feared and respected across continents. If they told you that, you would walk differently. You would think differently. You would expect more from the world. But vague labels like West African keep you disconnected, rootless, detached from the greatness that flows through your veins. It's psychological warfare disguised as science, because a disconnected person can be sold any history, any lie, any identity. But a connected person? A connected person is dangerous, uncontrollable, unstoppable, and they know it. That's why they oversimplify your DNA. That's why they bury your true roots under generic labels. But today we are digging them back up, because your identity is not vague. It is rich, it is royal, it is real, and it's time to reclaim it. They can try to erase the history books. They can try to distort the maps. They can even try to oversimplify your DNA results. But there's one place they can't hide the truth. Inside your blood, inside your very cells, lies a story too ancient, too powerful, and too undeniable to bury. In 2017, a groundbreaking discovery shocked the scientific world. A study published in Nature, 2017, revealed that ancient fossils found in South Africa contained DNA that pushed the timeline of modern humans back by tens of thousands of years. The finding proved that Homo sapiens didn't just start in East Africa in 2018 and move on. They thrived all across Africa, longer, stronger, and more diversely than anyone had ever admitted before. Your DNA doesn't just connect you to one region, it connects you to the very origins of humanity itself. Think about that. Every civilization, every kingdom, every invention, every empire, it all traces back to you. The way your ancestors adapted to every environment, the way they survived droughts, disease, predators, the way they innovated agriculture, language, governance. It's all encoded inside you. Your DNA isn't just a map. It's a survival manual. It's living, breathing proof of a greatness that no test tube can fully measure. And that's exactly why they keep it buried. Because if the world truly understood how ancient, resilient, and world-shaping African DNA is, the entire narrative of superiority would collapse. They couldn't sell you inferiority anymore. They couldn't sell you shame. They couldn't sell you shame. They couldn't sell you shamelessness disguised as culture, because you would know you don't come from slaves. You come from the architects of civilization. Every cell in your body is a witness. Every drop of blood is an archive. Every beat of your heart is a song, older than pyramids, older than empires, older than kings. And no database, no system, no lab coat can ever erase that. Now that you know the truth buried in your DNA, ask yourself, why would they hide it? Why would they build an entire genetic industry that simplifies, erases, and sells you only fragments of your true identity? Because if you knew who you really are, the world they built would start to crumble. If black people knew the full depth of their ancestral power, spiritually, biologically, historically, Entire systems of control would fall like dominoes. You wouldn't just see yourself as part of a race. You would see yourself as part of the royal bloodline of human existence. You would walk with the confidence of someone whose story shaped continents, civilizations, and the destiny of humankind. And if you walk like that, you can't be easily manipulated, and you can't be easily marketed to. You can't be easily divided. You can't be easily conquered. Identity is power. When you know who you are, you resist narratives that tell you you're nothing. You reject systems built on your silence. You demand the inheritance your ancestors left behind. This is why they don't invest in tracing your roots. This is why they keep African DNA understudied, underfunded, and misunderstood. Because if the African diaspora ever connected fully to its true history, it would be the end of economic exploitation, the end of cultural theft, the end of the mental colonization that has been in place for centuries. They can't afford for you to know that your blood carries memory older than pyramids, that your genes hold survival codes written by the first humans, that your story doesn't start with chains, it starts with crowns. They don't want you to remember that you are the blueprint, the origin, the living testament that black excellence isn't, it's eternal. You're not rootless. You're not broken. You're not lost. You're disconnected by design. But today, that disconnection ends because the truth they buried is rising back to the surface. And it cannot be stopped. They may have hidden your roots. They may have distorted your story, but you don't have to stay disconnected. You have the power to reclaim what they tried to erase. Here's how you start. 1. Choose African-led DNA services. Skip the corporations that profit from your confusion. Instead, use African-centered companies like African Ancestry, which specializes in tracing specific African lineages through maternal and paternal DNA. They don't just give you percentages, they connect you directly to tribes, nations, and cultures. Because they believe in restoring identity, not selling you fragments of yourself. 2. Support African genome projects. Institutions like 54Gene are fighting to build real African genomic databases, owned by Africans for Africans. The more we invest in our own research, the less they can control the narrative about our DNA. Ownership is the foundation of liberation. 3. Demand transparency from DNA companies. When you use services like 23andMe or Ancestry DNA, demand answers. Where is your DNA data going? Who owns your genetic information? Are African populations properly represented in their reference panels? Your blood is not just data. It's a birthright, and you have the right to protect it. 4. Learn your history beyond DNA. Ancestry isn't just in your blood. It's in your culture, your languages, your traditions. Study the great African civilizations. Mali Empire, Songhai Empire, Kingdom of Kush, Great Zimbabwe. Learn about the philosophers, the astronomers, the mathematicians, the warriors who shaped the world. You are their living continuation. Speak the names. Reclaim the names of tribes, nations, ancestors long buried under labels like West African. When you say their names, you call them back into the present. You restore what was stolen. You bring the memory home, because if they won't give you the map, you make your own. If they won't tell you the full truth, you seek it out with your own hands, your own heart, your own spirit. You were never meant to stay lost. You were meant to remember. And every step you take toward the truth is a victory over every system that tries to make you forget. They thought they buried you, and the lies under vague categories, under silence. But the truth survived. It survived in your blood. Ha! It survived in your bones. It survived in the heartbeat passed down through generations, whispering from ancestor to ancestor. Remember who you are. They built systems to make you forget. They built industries to sell you fragments. They wrote textbooks and lab reports designed to keep you confused, divided, diminished. But they failed. Because you are here, you are searching, you are remembering. And once you remember, they can never steal that from you again. You are not simply West African. You are not broadly Sub-Saharan. You are the descendant of kingdoms. You are the child of empires. You are the living proof that Africa didn't just survive history. Africa made history. You are the echo of greatness. You are the continuation of resilience. You are the spark of a fire they could not extinguish. And no test result, no algorithm, no white-coated scientist can change that. If this message stirred something inside you, if you feel the ancestors rising in your spirit, then don't let this truth stay buried. Comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Let the world see. From every country, every city, every continent, we are remembering what they tried to erase. Share this video. Speak the names they silenced. Stand tall on the foundation they tried to hide, because they hid 90% of your African roots. But now you know. Now you see. Now you remember. And when a people remembers who they are unstoppable.